So I'll introduce you to our speaker today. We have Antu, who's the Customer Success Director with SharpCloud Software. Antu, can you tell us a little bit about your talk today?
Yeah, thank you, Charlie, and thanks to everyone for joining. So today what I'd like to share is some of our experience that we've gathered from SharpCloud, working with a range of customers in all sorts of sectors: oil and gas, government, other commercial sectors, really to sort of explore some of those questions around, how do you really sort of see complexity and harness it in order to solve certain challenges, such as, the nitty-gritty issue of product obsolescence. So, the lessons that we've learned from our customers around, using visual techniques to address these sorts of challenges.
Excellent. For context, SharpCloud is a software that OGTC has been using for many years now. I used it on Wednesday to a webinar, funnily enough. So it's a program that we really like, and to be honest, I think we only scratched the surface. So it'd be great to see it, put into action by a pro. So Antu, without further ado, your 20 minutes starts now.
Thank you. So as we mentioned, this is really a sort of a roll-up of some of our experience working with a number of customers, as I mentioned, including in the oil and gas space, both in the UK and in the US, really where, we've seen some certain approaches that have been very successful around, harnessing data to visualize and then help to address complex challenges, including things like product obsolescence. I'm not going to claim, excuse me, to be, an expert in every aspect of the oil and gas industry, but I think some of what I will communicate hopefully will transfer across both industries and use cases as well. So we'll wrap up with some lessons learned, but hopefully it'll be a useful journey through a type of approach that has been successful to blend what we might call small data with big data. So I'm a big advocate of both big data, but also very much of small data, and I'll put that into context as we go through. So in terms of the challenge, just briefly, I'm going to sort of talk about a fictitious company called Dulson, but they could be, any complex organization with lots of business units, lots of teams, lots of products to manage, and so on. Often there's a challenge of communication, and that challenge often is then addressed or tackled through the use of things like websites to communicate strategy, PDF documents, and so on. And as you come further into the organization, there may be, PowerPoint and Excel and all sorts of other tools, naturally, very good tools used to try and communicate between groups, between levels, between departments, around different initiatives and so on. The challenge is often that there's maybe not a shared language and maybe not a common picture that ties those sort of elements together and binds those people around a particular challenge like product obsolescence. So in general, what we have seen as a challenge that our customers are often wanting to face or to tackle is that, without a joined up common language, there can be issues with understanding, how things relate to strategy and, what is the why that's coming through. There can be challenges around, feeling like you can actually affect a change or tackle a problem if you're not sure where it fits and how you fit into that picture. And so collaboration can be a challenge. What that can mean going, if you like, back up from the teams within an organization to the business and its performance is that there can be patchy alignment, insights are maybe not as clear as you would hope, and therefore performance is maybe under threat or is challenged. And that can be more so, I guess, within current conditions, people leaving organizations, restructuring. More than ever now, I would contend that we need some sort of glue, we need some sort of common way of looking at the business that persists through all these changes. So what I'd like to do, and excuse me for obviously putting SharpCloud squarely in place here, but is to show an example of how having a common language and a common sort of picture to be able to see that complexity allows you then to start addressing these challenges. So first of all, I'm actually going to start with a very quick jump into Excel. Everything I show is fictitious. The data is not real, but you know, it's the type of data that often businesses are relying on to try and get a sense of where they are, where they're going. So complex product portfolios falling under lots of different areas, such as lab consumables or lab hardware. I know some of these are not necessarily the exact product sets in the oil and gas industry, but you know, in this case, we're going to talk about the lab technologies and how we can harness visuals to address them. Looking at performance, that can sometimes be something that we look at in a short term, you know, annually or quarterly or, you know, year on year, whatever it might be. But often the challenges are just a little bit further away, and we need to really be cognizant of that long term and the short term in addressing these challenges. So the type of data that we've just seen there in Excel, a number of our customers will then bring that into an environment where initially, straight away, you start to benefit from more visuals. So it is just data, but as I mentioned, you know, we at SharpCloud and working with our customers, we try and look at that small data set that sits at the top of the organization, that overlays, you know, onto the lower levels of data, onto the big data that you might hold, but all of the aspects that could come together to give you a consolidated view of your portfolio, your strategy, your landscape. So thinking about Dulcin Technologies, the first thing that they did in terms of looking at their product set was to think about when those products are successfully generating revenue. And in short, what we can see is that there are a number of products that are starting to come to the end of life. They're currently selling, but as we look at further date periods, we can see that a lot of them are then starting to go through review periods, last time buy, and then ultimately to a support only situation. And without sort of straining our eyes too much, we can probably see that within a year or two, not too far from now, there are not many that are still going to be generating revenue, and there are not too many new products coming through. Now that can be the same whether we look at, you know, this portfolio of products or lab consumables. Again, we can start to see that we've got a lot happening historically and for maybe the next few years, but then we start to hit a bit of a fallow patch. And this is just using data that might come from various business systems, but be that high level information that we really need to harness. So taking that sort of forward, this is where we can start to then think in terms of, you know, what does that picture tell us about the health of the organization? What we'll see here is the same individual products, but now shown as boxes. They are the rows of data, and a total for the portfolio worth. So how much is this portfolio worth over the next periods of time? And starkly, you can see that if we just read the margins here, within a year, there's maybe £7 million, so 10% of the overall revenue that could be lost as products go out of maturity or go out of service. If we look further down, we can start to see that by, you know, 6 to 10 years, we're actually losing probably 90% of that revenue. We look specifically at lab hardware, which is what we were seeing on our first picture. We can see that it's a fairly typical picture. There is a lot of value, almost 9 or so million out of perhaps 10 in total, that is going to be lost over the next 5 to 10 years. And not a great deal that is going to replace it, some of which is still in the research stage and needs to come through all the way through this funnel. So first of all, by putting the data into a more visual context, we can start to interact around multiple dimensions, and we can start to ask those challenging questions and actually see very transparently where the real challenges lie, whether it be with the hardware, whether it's with the consumables. In this case, the organization is seeing a fairly common picture, which is that as they look at that portfolio and they look maybe 10 years out, there is a fair amount of it that is going to start declining and going to start affecting their bottom line. So this is one of the first phases, is really making data, reasonably small data, but important data, very accessible for people to interact with through multiple dimensions. So what happens next? Well, in the case of a lot of our customers, if they're successful, they will start to involve other parts of the business. And so in this case, I'm jumping forward a little bit, and Dulson, having seen that the product portfolio needs absolute sort of management and careful consideration, then started looking at everything from their strategy through to their marketing activity, through to technology and regulatory issues that they may need to consider as they transition their portfolio. So now we're seeing some of the same types of views, but delivered through an interactive portal put together so that a mixed group of people now can start to interact around the challenge. So, for example, being able to understand what the strategy is, and allowing people who are involved maybe on the product side of things or the technical side to maybe understand actually what are our strategic objectives within the Asia Pacific region or any other area of the world, so that anything that they're doing can start to align to those strategic objectives. Often it's a question of also thinking about compliance. How are the products that you're looking to maybe bring through as replacements for those that are going out of obsolescence or out of service? What compliance and what regulations and what sort of criteria do they need to meet, and by what stage, in order to then help deliver those products? So here we can just see some of maybe the compliance challenges or regulatory compliance that would need to be addressed in order to deliver maybe some of the products that we're starting to think about as replacements for the portfolio. We can think in terms of the marketing activity. That comes maybe a little bit later tying it in, but if we are really starting to think about what we're doing holistically, what are the campaigns that we can run that can start to breathe new life into old products, or start to position new products ready for us to deliver and expand on? And whether that be marketing campaigns, direct campaigns, global events, looking at where they happen, what audience they'll affect, and how they're tied into the strategy is a big part of it. Now, at the moment, I've been showing you everything as separate sort of views, but in a moment we'll come to, I think, where the magic happens, which is where things start to tie together across all of those strands to really start to deliver that picture. But first of all, if I just start with thinking about obsolescence, what drives obsolescence? Well, it's often a removal of a piece of technology that you're relying on, or some change in the market, or something else around the collective makeup of that product, hardware, software, etc., etc. So in this case, for lab hardware, we might be able to see that there's maybe a particular component that is driving obsolescence. It's going to go out of service somewhere in 2023, and that is potentially causing us to have to sunset some of those products that we're seeing. So what can we do about that? How can we respond to that obsolescence driver? How can we tie in our marketing activity? How can we ensure we get ourselves, the compliance and checkbox success that we need? How can we bring through the technology, and how can we then deliver products that are aligned with our strategy? So this is where really the magic starts to happen, is when we start to think about how it all ties together. So first of all, it may be a question of thinking about, okay, in response to that obsolescence, what are the new products that we could probably identify as potential for a period around 2023 to start to deliver and fill in that gap where our previous products have failed? So again, a number of products now being sort of specified based on collaborative activity and thinking about how they align to strategy and all those other things I've mentioned. So a number of ideas now of what can be done to address that complexity. But as I mentioned, the magic sort of happens when we really start to think in terms of bringing that all together. So if I just go back to the previous view, and I'll zoom back out. So having looked at the strategy, having thought about the technology research that's required, the regulations and so on, we can then start to tie it all together to see how that driver of obsolescence, which may be a small part of a big landscape that ties through technology research, our product portfolio and all the rest of it, how we can respond to that particular challenge around obsolescence. So here what we're able to do, and this again is part of what we see with our customers, the success of creating a small, navigable, interactive data set, similar to what you might have in Excel or some of your other environments, but presenting it in a way where people can follow those trains of thought. Then you can start to zoom in on what can we do. And so here we can focus in on that collection of connected items, as we call them, and really start to see that we can solve our problem. This product's going out of service and going into support only by around 2023. By looking at it holistically and thinking about how we can respond as an organization, we're able to see that in response to that, that drive of becoming obsolescent, we can look to deliver new technology, achieve the relevant compliance within this particular period, to then allow a product to be delivered for this sort of timescale, giving a long revenue stream, supported by the relevant marketing campaigns and in alignment with our strategic objectives. So we can look at things from, strategy upwards, we can look at things from drivers downwards, we can look at things from any aspect of that portfolio. So it really gives us an ability to start looking at how we can respond to a challenge. So our successful customers have sort of brought together the small set of data, provided it in an interactive environment where their teams can start to look at not just individual products, such as their lab hardware, and drill in and have a look, but where they can come all the way back out and they can start to think in terms of other product areas. They can look at how they're achieving revenues at the moment, what the obsolescence landscape looks like, what they can bring through on their new roadmap, so what are the new responses, and then right through to what can we do as a collective group roadmap to respond to that. And providing it in a way where people can interact with it and find those bits of information is key. So just tying off, if I come back to PowerPoint, hopefully that gives a sense of how using some small data that you might bring in from other sources, or you might construct, you can really tie people together around a collective why. Get people's energy engaged in the same direction, get them collaborating to solve a problem. That alignment that you create generates new insights that everybody can share in, and those persist beyond the changes that can happen, as organizations. I know the oil and gas have, a sort of, a natural sort of need to contract and expand as markets change. But you can keep those insights, you can keep that landscape available as people and organization change. And you can therefore respond to any challenges that come up, whether it be around a product component, whether it be around a change in direction, a change in strategy, by providing that joined up landscape. So in short, I think, SharpCloud in this case, or a way of looking at things in a joined up visual interactive sense, can allow you to really take on the challenges that we've seen. And I'll finish off on this last slide. Happy to talk more about these points. But I think in a lot of our learning, the lessons we have seen our customers really benefit from are, first of all, be transparent. To quote, the transport network, see it, say it, sorted. Absolutely a key thing. If you can see it, you can build a narrative around it. You can then, take the right action. Be collaborative, involve everybody. Don't see it as a product problem. Don't see it as a, leadership problem. It's a marketing challenge. It's a compliance challenge. It's everybody involved to solve that problem. And don't forget little data. Now, often there is a clamor for big data. Big data is fantastic. Of course it is. But it's often the little data, which is a knowledge that you can't replace through big data as people move out of the business. Those little connections that they know that they can put through in the data, those little insights that they've generated leading to further views and conversations with people. And if you do those things, then you can tackle complexity now rather than feel that it's out of reach. And I think that's something that we feel very, very strongly about working with our customers, that complexity is there to be tackled. It can be, and it's often a blend of small data and big data. So thank you for your attention. I'll pause there and hand back to Charlie.
Excellent. Thank you, Antu. No, that was really interesting. So I will open the floor up to questions now. As we said, you can do it two ways, by putting it in the chat or by raising your virtual hand. I see we have a question in there already. What are the methods for getting data in and keeping that data up to date?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where there's two ends of the scale and everything in between, and I'll just paint those two ends. One end is to create new data in SharpCloud. Sometimes what you're actually modeling is a combination of information that doesn't exist in other business systems in the way that you feel it would be useful. So, starting to merge levels, strategy down to projects, down to technologies. Sometimes those are not all managed in one system where you can go and grab that data. So constructing new data and laying out those relationships can be done directly. But there are also connectors. You can paste in data from Excel, but there are connectors to automate data coming in from business systems like Jira and Microsoft Project and HP PPM and all those sorts of standard business systems, which all of these large organizations have. So there's automation, there's APIs, there's ways of bringing that data in on batch, but also interestingly, and I think importantly, being able to shuffle it around and move it around within the SharpCloud landscape to ask questions, not necessarily to change the master data, but to pose those difficult questions that then you can go and challenge in the business systems.
Okay. Excellent. No, that's definitely very interesting from my point of view as well. I probably should point out to people that the session is being recorded, so we really encourage you to ask questions, but if you don't feel comfortable, that's not a problem. So a quick question from me, actually. What advice do you have for people who are making their SharpCloud story from scratch? Because I think that one of the hardest things that I found is that I personally am sort of limited by my own imagination in a lot of ways. So do you have any advice for people to get sort of to design it and get up and running with it?
Yes, I think if I can just quickly go back to one view, just to point this out, which is something I didn't really do as I came through. So I'm just going to show that it's all about a blend of content. So, for example, a new product that we might be bringing through, what's important for people to know? So this is something that's I think at the heart of what SharpCloud is, and therefore how you approach things is, if we're talking about a product, what is it that will help people within your organization who are not within the product team to actually understand it? So how can we blend, structured data, so what maybe everybody would need to know around revenues and dates and things like that, but with that softer information, whether it be PowerPoint presentations that help people to understand how we're going to deliver a product, images that bring it to life, so that you're building up an understanding almost as people traverse through this landscape of information. So to my mind, a lot of it is thinking about who are the people that you're trying to engage and what type of information will help them understand the landscape and the complexity, and then start to participate in the solution for it. So I think it's about understanding stakeholders. I think it's then about modeling a little bit of what they would like, and it is an iterative thing. I think that the area that we find we work in is where out of the box products that force a particular model don't necessarily give all of the flexibility and all of the angles that the various stakeholders are looking for. There are some fantastic tools, absolutely, in lots of different areas. But we all know, for example, PowerPoint doesn't allow you particularly well to take a journey of discovery through content. It does a great job at presenting information, a better job than anything at presenting information when you know what you want to communicate or when you know what the agenda is. So I think it's an evolving thing, and it does take a reasonable amount of head scratching, because you're trying to solve those complex challenges around 5 or 6 generations of people within your organization. How do we bring those into the conversation so they can feel they can solve it? How do we get people whose focus is on compliance and regulation to actually understand that what they're doing is impacting products and impacting strategy and impacting marketing? So it's probably not answered your question fully, Charlie. I think it's a combination of stakeholders getting hold of the right data and structuring it in a way where it tells a story, and then iterating on that as you find that there are insights that are not yet covered, gaps in the journey that people want to take through it. And that comes from people exploring it, where they start to say, actually, I get this far, and then it would be really good to know about, markets, what markets we're in. So you start thinking, okay, we need to bring in a little bit extra data about markets. But it tends to be that iterative approach, because as opposed to big data, where BI tools will maybe sort of, say, give me as much as you like, and I'll do something sensible with it. SharpCloud is about what's important, what questions are you trying to ask? Let's model that, let's have that narrative. And then as you start to find that you need a little bit more, let's go and get that important information. Because, and I'll tie off on this, we found some organizations will get paralyzed by, my data isn't complete, it's not good enough. We feel we can't move forward. Probably your data will never be good enough. You're collecting more all the time. It's getting more and more complex to see the wood for the trees. I think it's more about thinking, what are we trying to address as a challenge, and what data do we need to support that? And having that smaller landscape that then leads to the detail. As an example in here, I didn't really, again, dwell on it, but I'll nip to it quickly, is it's not actually data about this product, but you'll see here we've got a big data view integrated within the item. So as well as looking at the product in a sort of strategic sense, we could be looking at a detailed big data view into that product, into all the data points that we hold. So it's more about constructing, how that visual landscape sits above all of your big data assets to give them a context. So probably half answers your question, Charlie. I think there's an element of design thinking, stakeholder mapping, and then iterative road testing of how it's supporting people deliver what they think as you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you. No, that was really interesting. Do we have any sort of other questions anyone wants to chip in with? Just for your information, our next Tech20 event will be on the 7th of August with TechX, but we do have other events taking place in the meantime, and you can find details of that on our website. If there's anything you're interested in, you can sign up for that there. So if there are no further questions, I'll draw the session to a close, and it doesn't look like there are. So thank you very much, Antu. I really appreciate your time, and thank you to everyone who dialed on today. Very much appreciate your time. Do hope that wherever you are and whatever you're doing, you are staying safe and healthy and happy. And we will see you again soon. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for your time, everyone.